Hi, and welcome back to the Fortify Your Brain Summit. I'm Betsy Schroeder, your host, and today I have as my guest Dr. Michael Nelson. And Dr. Nelson has a doctorate in chiropractic medicine from the University of Western States in Portland, Oregon, as well as a bachelor's degree in respiratory science. He is a practicing chiropractic physician with over 1,500 hours of postgraduate training in functional medicine. As a practitioner, Dr. Nelson has a personal passion for reversing chronic conditions such as thyroid dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, autoimmunity, fibromyalgia, hormone imbalances, metabolic syndrome, and hypertension. In addition to his years in private practice, Dr. Nelson has developed and marketed nutraceutical formulations for brain health, immunity, and adrenal fatigue. He is well respected for his clinical acumen and for his empathetic concern for his patients. Welcome, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you, Betsy.
So to start out with, share a little bit about how you went from your interest in respiratory science to chiropractic, and then to a particular interest in the brain.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. So I started my career initially in healthcare as a respiratory therapist, and I worked in a level 3 intensive care nursery. So I worked with premature infants, critically ill premature infants. So I got to see really the miracles of modern medicine right before my very eyes, because we were taking babies that were they were 350 grams, which is, less than a pound, and allowing them to survive and using technology that was incredible. And so that spurred my interest into furthering my education. And initially, I thought for sure I was going to go to medical school. There's a medical school in the town that I live in, Reno. And I started looking into it, and I started to discover that this wasn't really what I wanted to do. It didn't really have at the core the overall health values that I embraced and that I thought were really necessary to basically be a healthy individual. And nor as a doctor were they really espousing these. They weren't really talking about those to the patients. They weren't really using them in their clinical toolkit. They were just simply trying to patch them up and get them out. Yeah. So I started to investigate what would be another option. And during that period of time, it was there was a lot of insurance reimbursement taking place, and you were looking for opportunities to be able to set your shingle out and be able to take insurance plans. And although I really wanted to go to naturopathic college, at the time, the insurance reimbursement system wasn't really embracing that. So they were embracing chiropractic. So I chose Western States because it really aligned with all the different I would say educational objectives that I had. They actually taught minor surgery at this college. They delivered babies. There were a lot of things that they did at that college that they didn't do at any of the other colleges in the nation or world. So, and plus it's Portland. I love Portland. It was beautiful. So I chose to go there really to try and establish a family practice that could essentially treat chronic disease and help people get better through natural means. And that's where I ended up. And that was a long time ago. And during that, when I was at school, I ran across work of Dr. Jeff Bland. And of course, Dr. Bland is the founder, and he's the #1 guy when it comes to functional medicine. He's the guy that coined the term functional medicine. He's the founder of the Institute for Functional Medicine. So I started to discover his work, and this is back in 1991.
Oh, wow.
So a long time ago. It was before it was actually called functional medicine. I remember when he transitioned into that. And so I heard him talk, and I thought, this is exactly what I needed to hear. This is exactly what, this is, when you hear the truth just rings so clear in your ears, and you just go, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I've never turned back. And so since that time frame, I still maintain some contact with Dr. Bland and some of the other people that are in the functional medicine world out there. I remember when Mark Hyman came in, I knew Dr. Perlmutter. So there's a lot of these luminaries that I got to kind of sit at the feet of and learn how they were actually dealing with the chronic diseases that were presenting before them. And during this time, we were talking about leaky gut and people were just poo-pooing it. They were saying there's no such thing as leaky gut. You're crazy. You don't know what you're doing. So we had a lot of resistance as it related to just our concept of treating the human and how we would want to go about doing something that was so non-related, a gut issue, to a headache. Mm-hmm. And yet when you treated things like dysbiosis or chronic irritable bowel syndrome and you got them better, you saw all these other things get better. So it's something that I've been passionate about for going on 30 years now. And I feel really strongly about what we've done as a profession, a functional medicine profession, and where we're going and how it's shaping and crafting the future for hopefully a lot of people to get better and a lot of doctors to practice this concept.
Oh, definitely. So how did that then lead to your interest in the brain?
Well, one thing that's for certain, that anybody that has a chronic disease also has a mood disorder, and they go together. Like you don't have a chronic disease and feel great. No. You have a chronic disease and feel bad. Mm-hmm. And so you're always dealing with some form of psychological impact. And I found out the power of the psychological impact when I went through some training in my early years, and my professors would talk about a concept of functional overlay. And it's a term that I don't know if many people know about, but it's a term that we use to describe when we name a disease to a person. If I tell you that you've got degenerative disc disease, that conjures up a whole concept in your head that you start to revolve around as potentially a bad back, right? Mm-hmm. You've got degenerative disc disease, you've got degeneration. And this psychological overlay that impacts the spirit and the psyche of the individual, when you name it and blame it like that, yep, has profound impact on the overall recovery rate and how they start to view themselves as a viable organism to recover. Mm-hmm. So I was very sensitive to that from the very beginning, and I never did that. And I would never, everybody wants to know what they have. Yeah. And in the functional medicine world, it's like, well, we really work at the root cause mechanism. So when we try and identify what they have, it's not going to be a name it and blame it type thing. It could be something as simple, as complex as a dysbiotic bowel, or it could be something as simple as a insufficiency in a neurotransmitter that we need to re-regulate. So this idea that the brain was involved in the overall general health was something that I never lost track of. I knew it in my own personal life, but I also knew it in the lives of the patients that I would come to see me, and I took that very seriously. And I also saw that during the times in which they would have these ideas of who they were and how they actually felt about themselves, they would start to express different neurological, psychological disorders. And this was at the time, back in the 90s, when we were starting to coin this term called psychoneuroimmunology. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. So psychoneuroimmunology, and this is this concept that basically says we're all interrelated and connected. And this connection then impacts all these psychoneuroimmunological, hormonal, gastrointestinal effects in our body. And so this process that takes place when we become sick, when we become altered in our concept of who we are, really starts to move us into a degenerating state in our head. And the science is bearing this all out now, that as we start to think, so we are. And as we start to change our thinking, so we are. And so the biggest thing that I had to do was to try and take people's psychology and integrate that into a psychoneuroimmunological relevance standpoint, so that they could start to re-engage with the process of really who they were, and then add all the other elements, which could be functional medicine tools and tricks and different things that we would use to try and promote the overall wellness of that individual. And overall, as they started to get better, they started to change their belief, because the belief was manifesting in the way they felt.
Oh, wow.
And so that's kind of how I started to approach this whole concept of brain. And it couldn't be more important than it is today, with what's going on in the world and the change that we're basically experiencing.
Oh yeah, all that stress. So, yeah, with the almost 30 years in functional medicine, you have particularly focused on helping people to understand and take action in supporting their brain health, and then are describing the long-term consequences of that, the neurological issues, as neuroprogression. So what is neuroprogression? Can you explain that, and then tell us how it might show up in the body?
Yeah, neuroprogression is, I love the term, number one, because it really talks about this ongoing process that takes place over a period of time. And neuroprogression was first coined by an Australian researcher, Michael Burke, and he was looking at the kind of the clinical manifestation over time that took place both in major psychological disorders, from schizophrenia, anxiety, bipolar, and what they were looking at is this progressive nature of neurodegeneration that was taking place with more and more incidents of these episodes. Okay, so if we have a bipolar disorder, and we have more frequent bipolar disorder events, and so we have more episodes of this.
Yep.
We know for sure that's manifesting as changes in the brain, and we can measure those. You can actually measure these, and I've measured them in many of my patients, where we can actually take areas of the brain, volumes of the brain, and we can start to look at that and determine whether or not that is being impacted by the episodic nature of this disorder. So neuroprogression is kind of the clinical manifestation over the episodes, and the rewiring of the brain that takes place over these episodes that manifest as cognitive deterioration, lack of coping skills, ADHD, anxiety, and all the other various elements that kind of make up the fabric of society that we're seeing today. So when they talk about it, they're talking about it in very clinical applications. I'm saying neuroprogression, we're all exposed to it, and we get to change the progressive nature of it in a positive or a negative way based on the inputs that we start to apply to that neurological system and the psychological system.
Wow. So then what are the driving factors to go one way or the other?
Well, I mean, you can really kind of, there's many things that will drive it, but I can narrow it down to a few things that would be, I think, relevant for our audience. Number one, stress. And stress isn't just stress like psychological stress, or the stress of potential infections, or the stress of not paying your bills. It's the cumulative stress. And Bruce McEwen from McGill coined the term allostasis. He didn't actually coin the term, but he used this model of allostasis, the cumulative load of stress that's being placed upon our physiology that's making us adapt to the change, can be overwhelmed. And so stress needs to be looked at from a number of different inputs, from the environment, the relationships, the way we think about ourselves, how much sleep we get, the amount of blue light we expose ourselves to, the information that comes at us and how we process that, and then the time that we spend still or contemplating, so that we can actually reset and organize our thinking in such a way that we can make sense of the world and move away from that stress. So stress, number one. Number two would be inflammation. And inflammation and stress go together, really. You can't, they're like brothers and
Right.
sisters. So, the inflammation is something that is we need. We got to have it. We want it because it helps to allow molecules to get to places that they need to go to when they need to go there. But when we're in a state of chronic inflammation, we're overwhelming the inflammatory burden in the body. It has profound impact on our neurological system, unlike any other. And what ends up happening is we start to alter the circuitry in our brain. We really start to change the circuits in our brain. And we start to activate things in our brain that shouldn't be activated on a regular basis at the level that they're being activated. Now, the brain is 2% of the body mass, 2% of the body mass, 2% of the body mass, right? Not very much. Consumes about 30% of your energy at rest.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot, right? So it's a very energy dependent organ, and it consumes a lot for its mass. That means that what's consuming that energy, we have to try and manage a little bit. And the major thing that starts to get activated under an inflammatory burden is the non-neuronal cells, the non-wiring cells of the brain that make up 80% of your brain mass. These are the immune cells of the brain, the microglia and the glia and the astrocytes and the oligodendrocytes. And all these cells then start to become alive in a way that they normally shouldn't be alive unless they're under some type of threat. Okay. And under chronic stress and chronic inflammation, those start to really turn on and change the circuitry and the wiring. And that also alters the way we look, act, and feel, and the behavior patterns that we start to see. You know, a study came out just about a year and a half ago, and it was a study I've never seen of, but it was a study on the deaths from despair. Have you heard of this study? It's a huge study. It's a global study where they looked at the level of despair. And despair is a state of mind, right? Despair. Think about that word, despair. It just makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
The level of despair that's taking place in the world today is off the charts, and it's the number one cause of death in the world now. Despair.
Wow.
And this isn't just in the U.S. This is worldwide. So despair is something that's real, and it gets impacted by stress and inflammation. And then the third thing is definitely our lifestyle. So our lifestyle drives so much of what we do, and yet it's a circular pattern that we end up in. If we have good thoughts and we have good brain activity and we've got some control and we've got people that can help us get through some of these trials and tribulations with some tools that they can use and empower us with. Like the patients, I always empower my patients to take action and to do the things that they know that they should be doing. Don't worry about it. If they fall down, get back up. It's not, trying to get it perfect. It's trying to just stay on the road to getting it better. And so lifestyle makes a huge impact on it. And that's a huge topic in and of itself. So I always taught lifestyle factors I taught cooking classes to my patients. I would actually go to a kitchen and teach them how to cook. I would teach them how to shop. I taught them basically how to meditate and be mindful and use nature to its fullest extent, so that they could actually start to see that they have choices that they can make that they may not have seen before until they've got somebody to help them along. Mm-hmm. And then I would also teach them how to exercise, and I would take them to the gym, and we would go to the gym and give them a whole routine, and we'd get them involved in their active pursuit of being better. And lo and behold, their brains got better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. Were there any other studies about exercise and how that impacts the brain, or anything else you want to share in that realm?
Yeah, so exercise is one of the biggest things that you could ever do for brain health. It's the thing that is the common denominator for a couple of really important molecules that help regrow brain cells. and those are, brain-derived neurotrophic factor and nerve growth factor. Both those hormones are like, you've probably heard the term miracle grow for the brain, actually help to stimulate the brain's neurogenesis, meaning the new activity of brain cells and growing of new brain cells. There's regions in the brain that can regrow, and these are the memory centers of the brain. So we get to access that nerve growth factor and the BDNF brain-derived neural growth factor with exercise. Exercise promotes that hormonal response in our brain. And I came really into contact with this when I was going to school up in Portland. My undergrad degree is obviously in science, so I understood, and the nomenclature was really clear to me. And I had a very, I don't want to say easy time, but I knew a lot about what we were talking about when it came to, the basic sciences. So I got to spend a lot of time doing extracurricular things like learning functional medicine while I was actually going to school and studying naturopathic medicine. But I always exercised.
Yeah.
And I could not believe the level of acuity that I started to develop in my brain. I thought to myself, I can learn anything. For some reason, I can learn anything. And I was just in awe of my mental capacity because I was exercising. I would ride my bike up into the Columbia River Gorge, and I would stay out in nature, and I would just really imbibe myself with a positive influence of exercise in nature. And that reflected back on my scores. I got great scores in school. And it wasn't because I was working harder. It was because I set up the right environment neurologically and hormonally in my brain.
Wow. Yeah, it makes sense. And you're increasing blood flow to the brain too, I guess, right?
Yeah. The blood flows. There's a lot of research now that's correlating the heart and the brain together, and cardiovascular disease risk basically equates to neurological disease risk. These go hand in hand. Anybody that's ever treated a type 2 diabetic or somebody that's got peripheral neuropathy, the first thing that we do is we start to change their blood sugar parameters so that we can actually get them to do better, because we know for sure the number one things that diabetics die from is cardiovascular disease. That's what's going to get them. Mm-hmm. And the brain is so sensitive to abnormalities in glucose that we start to really see some changes neurologically, degeneratively in the brain tissue once we get even to small levels of insulin resistance in the brain tissue. Oh, yeah. So it's important for blood flow to get there, but it's equally important for you to have all the other hormonal balances taking place as well.
Yeah, in fact, aren't they even calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes now?
Yeah, it's a great term for it. It's really a great term for it. And I think it's accurate. I mean, there's no question that you start to become insulin resistant at the central nervous system level, and you could be in big trouble if you don't get after it right away.
Wow. So going back to neuroprogression, are there tests and studies where you can see at what level they have neuroprogression?
Yeah. So neuroprogression is not a diagnosis. It's a term that we use again to kind of conceptualize this ongoing progressive nature of your neurological system, and they term it in a way that they use it so that you can see the decline. But I think neuroprogression can also show the incline or the regression of the neurological disease. So you asked us a really important question: is there anything that you can do, a blood test, or is there a biomarker, or is there a clinical study that you could perform, or some type of imaging study that you could use? And right now there is no blood test that will really accurately depict, that's clinically available right now. There's nothing that will accurately depict whether or not you've got neuroprogression. You can take some tests like the MOCA test and the SAGE test that we deliver, but those are late stage. When you find that, they're already well into it. The key is finding it early. So things that will, so to answer your question, there's no blood test. There are imaging studies where you can look at the areas of the brain like the hippocampus, and you can determine the volume of that hippocampus based on the age of that person. So if that person is 45 years old and they've got a hippocampal volume, and we measure that through MRI, and we've got a volume that's smaller, has shrunk than their normal age match, then we would be very concerned that that would be a sign of the neuroprogressive elements taking place in the brain, the memory center.
Yeah.
So before that, though, what ends up happening is what you see, and it's way more accurate than a blood test, is your own personal kind of assessment, your own inventory. Are you anxious? Do you have more blue days than bright days? Do you have trouble concentrating? Are you having difficulty sleeping?
Okay.
Is your hormone system off? Are you feeling like you always got something to do and there's never enough time? Are you under tremendous amounts of time pressure? These are all elements that will lead us into a neuroprogressive state if we do not take certain steps to avert that. Some of it's not even stopping what we have to do in our life, but maybe putting our seatbelt on while we do it. Like, you have to take care of your children, right? But you can also use things to help to promote neurogenesis and sleep and maybe less exposure to blue light. And all these things can be done, and you still have that responsibility and maybe that reactivity, that stress reaction, but you at least have your seatbelt on during that trip that you're taking with raising the children, or taking care of a loved one that's ill, or dealing with a undergrad degree or a postgraduate degree. We still have these responsibilities. We need to make sure that we manage the responsibility in a responsible way, which would be putting your seatbelt on.
Right. Yeah. And realizing that it's not like, oh, I'm just getting older, this is how it is, but there are actually things that you can do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anybody in functional medicine knows this. And anybody that's ever had to deal with, going to the doctor and asking what's wrong, and they throw up their hands and go, nothing, here's some Prozac, see you tomorrow. Right? So you recognize that there's a lot of gaps that are taking place right now in the medical system, in the traditional medical system. And when you start to become more self-empowered, and you start to look for some of these things that can be maybe beneficial, and you start to notice the results of these beneficial things that you're applying, you then start to recognize that there are lots of things that you can use and do to try and mitigate maybe some of these stressors, or maybe the consequence of those stressors.
Right. So you mentioned there are things that we can do. So and we've heard a lot of times about fish oil, and that's really beneficial for the brain, which I'll be on fish oil. So about the omega-3 fatty acids, how you've designed one that is unique and that has particular benefits. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So a couple years ago, I've developed quite a few nutraceuticals in the past for companies, and I've worked as like an expert formulator for them. I bought a manufacturing company, and I thought, I want to do this myself.
Yeah.
It was ignorance, and it was bliss, and now it's less ignorant and maybe still some bliss. But so one of the things I did was I wanted to be able to make products that would have great efficacy based on science. I could produce myself in an FDA registered facility, and I could really take my chemistry lab and apply it based on all my clinical experience. And I started looking into omega-3s, and I wasn't going to do it. I knew omega-3s were extremely important for brain health, and I know they are, and they are.
Yeah.
But I wasn't finding that there was a lot of differentiation in the market. And so I started doing some research, and I looked at a couple of studies that really caught my interest. And then I dug into the science, and it turned into be a rabbit hole that I can't get out of now. Yeah. And it is a extremely important concept for people to understand. First of all, the brain is 60% fat.
Mm.
And it's the largest repository of all of our omega-3 fatty acids, our central nervous system is. So it has the largest concentration of fatty acids in that 2% body mass,
Okay.
right? So it's a large area of that. And of the omega-3s, 90% are composed of one type of omega-3, and that's DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. It's the longest fatty acid that we have in our body. It's essential because we don't make it. So we have to ingest it, right?
Yeah.
And studies were clear. I remember, 20 years ago when it first started coming out in baby formula, and I saw the studies before that saying that if the mother had high DHA in her diet, that baby was likely to have a higher IQ. And in fact, they do have higher IQs because the central nervous system is so dependent upon it.
Okay.
So I started looking at the impact of DHA, and I found that DHA is also one of the most oxidizable, meaning that it becomes rancid the fastest of any omega-3 that we have, or any fat that we have, because of the long chain.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
it was problematic, and there was a lot of research saying don't take it, and most people don't know that. The problem is that you have to have it, but if you don't have the right amount of antioxidants to support that, you're in trouble. You could actually have a rancid fat that can cause more harm than good.
Yeah.
And studies have actually shown that when you just take DHA, it can actually be more harmful.
Okay.
So I ran across some literature on the retina. And the retina and DHA are intimately related because it's part of the brain. The eye is the only, I remember hearing this back in school 30 years ago. Hey, the eye is the only part of the brain you can see with your naked eye.
Yeah.
Right? You could actually visit. When we do eye exams, it was like, oh, that's your brain. That's amazing. And you could pick up heart disease and all sorts of other crazy things on just doing an eye exam, because you could see the arteries and you could see the vasculature and you could see if there was any strokes in the eye, and you could really, the eye is the window of the soul.
Yeah.
But in the middle of the eye, there's this little area called the macula. The macula is a highly concentrated pigmented area that only primates have. So no other mammal has it. Primates, we're human, we're a primate, right? Humans are a primate, and monkeys are a primate. They're the only ones that have this little dot, macula, and it's fully concentrated. It's the most concentrated area. It's a little freckle in the back of your eye, in the retina, that's loaded with lutein.
Oh.
So I thought, that's interesting. And so then I started looking at the brain research, and it turns out that lutein and DHA sit right next door to each other in the brain.
Oh, wow.
Right next door to each other. So our diet is about 1 to 3% lutein total. That's about it. We get of all the carotenoids. Most of the carotenoid that we get is beta carotene.
Yeah.
And yet, when you do when they do biopsies of the brain, or when they look at brain, there's a thing called the brain bank. When they look at kids' brains that have died from SIDS or other diseases under a year old, their brain is highly concentrated with lutein, even though their mother only had 1%, 500 times more. And so it sits right next to DHA, and it does that, DHA, because it protects DHA from that oxidation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So DHA is incorporated into the brain cells, but most importantly, it's incorporated into the mitochondrial membrane. Now, I remember at the beginning I told you that 2% of the body mass, and it consumes 30% of your energy.
Yep.
That means there's a lot of mitochondria zipping around in there.
Okay.
And those mitochondria, in the presence of a fatty substance, that they can produce a lot of free radicals that will oxidize the fat.
Oh,
right? I've got the most oxidizable fat in the human body, DHA, in the most concentrated area, in a very highly metabolically active area. We better protect it. The only way you protect it is with lutein.
Wow.
So lutein has to be given with the DHA. Thus, I created Brain Omega. And Brain Omega has a iphos fish oil, DHA, highly concentrated DHA in a tiny little raisin-shaped capsule, and Lutamax 2020. It's a standardized form of lutein that has been used in clinical trials at Tufts, at Georgia, a bunch of different institutions. They used it in the Georgia centenarian study where they looked at people that were 100 years old, give them this stuff. They looked at their macular pigment because that's a determination on whether or not their lutein concentrations are adequate. If I can see pigment, if I can measure your pigment in your eye, then I'm pretty sure that you're not, and it's high enough, I'm pretty sure you're not going to get macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness.
So I was just thinking,
Now,
okay.
we also know that when that macular pigment starts to degenerate, your brain starts to degenerate. And thus, some of the new ways to detect early mild cognitive impairment is look at the eye, the window of the soul.
Oh, wow.
And when we can see the pigment change, we also can pick up early changes in cognition. And when we replace that, we also start to see the recapitulation and the re-emergence of that cognition. We get better cognition. So check this out. They used 100-year-old women, or I think it was mostly women, and they gave them the lutein, and they were just looking to see if they could memorize things at the grocery store and do things that were going to be very helpful for them, in a daily task list. And they gave them this memory list, and then they gave them the lutein, and they followed them for up until their death. They measured their carotenoid levels in their eyes, their macular pigment density, and then they wanted to have a control, so they gave it to they gave it to a bunch of kids. I call them kids now, but a bunch of students at the Georgia that were just basically in school. They just need some healthy controls. Well, it turns out Georgia gives free tuition to anybody that's gets a B average or above. Everybody in the state gets access to their college there, free.
Wow.
So the competition is higher than if it was at Princeton, Yale, or Harvard. It's a high-level competition. These are high academically achieving individuals, but they used them as a control, and they gave them the same test. What was remarkable is not only did the older people respond positively to this combination of DHA, it's the exact formula that I use in my Brain Omega, not only did they get better with their cognition and be able to memorize tasks, but the kids or the students got better. Now this was unheard of, right? So it's like, how can a student that's got this much academical, capability, and their brain should be, basically at their peak, even improve, and yet it did. And that's how important the combination of these two ingredients are. So, it'll help eye health, but the eye is part of the brain. Most important thing to really remember about DHA, you have to have it with a carotenoid, particularly lutein. And Martha Nuringer up at OHSU, she did the seminal research on this where she took rhesus monkeys. Remember, primates are the only ones that have the macula, and they were the ones that highly concentrate the lutein. And she looked at the lutein levels, and she's the one that found that actually lutein and DHA, she used the term co-localize. They sit right next to each other, and they highly concentrate in the mitochondrial membrane. So not only is this good for your memory, but it's good for your energy centers in your brain. So it's a really, I can't speak highly enough of it, just because I don't think the message is out there. I think people are just simply saying, take fish oil and away you go. But you need to have it with something else.
Can you talk a little bit about lutein? I don't know if everyone knows what that is, and what does it naturally occur in, in foods?
Yeah, so lutein is a carotenoid. We have 300 plus carotenoids in the plant world. We eat about, I think, maybe 20. So we have a very limited range in which we consume lutein, and lutein is primarily found in green leafy vegetables. So spinach is a good source of lutein. Spinach has got quite a bit of lutein. Actually, some egg has it. The yellow yolk, that's lutein. It's a very yellow substance. It's a beautiful, beautiful substance. And so we're being told not to eat eggs, because of the high cholesterol, and especially don't eat the yolk when it's got some of the best substances known to man. And so we as a society, we just don't eat enough of it. And you need to have a lot of it, a lot more than we have. I mean, like I said, 1 to 3% of the total carotenoid intake is made up of lutein, and that's basically we're getting maybe 1 to 4 milligrams a day. You need 12. You need 12 milligrams or more. And it's a fat soluble substance, so you need to get on with this and maintain it so that you can actually keep your mitochondria healthy, keep your retina healthy, keep your antioxidant defense system healthy. So it's possible, and the studies are really, really awesome because they actually show that when you do use supplementation, it unequivocally improves your lutein status, both in macular pigment, optical density, but also, like I said, in cognition.
Wow. So you had mentioned macular degeneration, and I know that's actually also associated with the blue light exposure, and we're getting so much more blue light these days. So would taking like the DHA lutein combination be helpful in protecting our eyes and our brain from all the blue light exposure as well?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Our blue light's really important biologically for us. It's the first light that rises with the sun, and it starts to shut down the melatonin production, and it allows the circadian rhythm to start. And that's a really important feature of our biology that we've lost track of. And the lutein that sits in the retina is a shield for the actual retinal tissue. So it blocks, in particular, it blocks specifically the blue light, this very damaging UV radiation that can expose the retinal tissue to damage. And we burn it up the more we're exposed to blue light exposure, right? So if we don't have enough in our diet, we have too much blue light exposure, then we're gonna start to see changes in our retinal tissue, and actually our changes in our visual acuity, right? We're gonna have more. We could have more cloud or ghosting after we get a bright light from a oncoming car, or we could have less clarity when we see things. So we start to lose some vision affect. There's affected vision loss when you start to see a diminishment in that, and it's happening in young kids.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's a really important thing, and it's really important to also recognize that these are blue blockers I'm wearing, but recognize that we should probably have limited exposure to the blue light that we have right now, and we should also start to change the timing that we get that blue light. Not always, don't get it right before you go to bed. Really start to wean yourself off from that exposure and that stimulus.
Yeah, something to really keep in mind now that everyone's on Zoom all the time and everything's virtual and people are spending more time on the screens than ever before.
Yeah, I don't think it's that bad if we do it during the day hours, but as we start to move towards the evening hours and we start to change the kind of the angle of the sun, we should comply with that in our daily lives as well, so that we don't end up really altering our biology, our circadian rhythm. And I think that's just a really important thing. I really, it's hard for the kids today. I grew up without computers. I grew up with black and white TV, going to the farm, baling hay, really working on, just grass level things, being involved in earth. Mm-hmm. And I went to bed when the sun went down. I was so tired. Yeah. But kids today and adults today are so overly exposed to the screen that it's not only exposing them to the blue light, but it's exposing them to psychic stimulation too, that neuropsychoimmunological stimulation.
Oh yeah, that dopamine hit from scrolling Facebook or whatever it is, right?
Exactly.
So what do you do now on a regular basis? I know you have a lot of other supplements and whatnot, but what do you do to fortify your brain against the neuroprogression, against stress, etc.?
Yeah. Well, I've really needed to fortify my brain in the recent past with my new venture, just because there was so much new knowledge and learning that was taking place, so much new areas that I wasn't strong in, that I didn't want to be strong in. So I had to find people that were strong into it. Yeah. So I had to really stretch my trust and my my resources to limits that I never thought I would have, that I'm so grateful I've been able to do. So that allowed me to be able to reach and learn. I think that's a really important element within preventing neuroprogression, is being engaged in something that has meaning. My mom told me a long time ago that if you're going to do something with your life, make sure that it has social redeeming value. And I've really tried to do that with everything that I've done in my career.
Yeah.
And so I have a heart for what I'm doing. I really have a passion for what I'm doing. So that helps with neuroprogression. It makes me feel good.
Mhm.
It makes me feel like I'm giving to other people. I'm in service.
Yes.
Um, I also use a tremendous amount of supplementation. So I use everything in our line. I mean, I use everything from our curcumin mix to our brain body collagen mix to our selenium. I just use everything, right? I use our brain omega. We have a brain omega test for if you want to test your brain omega levels at home. You can
Oh,
just poke your finger and send it into our lab, and we'll give you a result. Um,
great.
so I use everything in our line, and then I get out in nature a lot. I mean, I live right next to Lake Tahoe, so
Oh,
um, I ride my bike. Like I rode my bike. I was out on my bike at 6 a.m. this morning, riding out into a small town outside of Reno here, getting in the sunlight early and
yeah.
getting fresh air and just getting my head together and just being still too afterwards. I meditate every morning and I journal every morning. So I use things to help reset my neurological apparatus so that I'm able to face the day and conquer what I need to conquer. I don't do it every day, conquer everything, but I
Yeah.
always come back to my balance point, which is, my pattern of behavior that helps set the stage for the opportunity to be better than I was yesterday.
Yes. Oh, love it. So where can people find you online? Your supplements and also your clinic?
Yeah, so I've got my nutritional line is brain-bean.com. And we have a coffee. That's why it's Brain Bean. We roast our own coffee. It's a really cool organic coffee. I actually roast it ourselves. And then drmichaelnelson.com. You can see more of me there. And if you just sign up for some of our information, we'll make sure that you stay in touch with anything that we've got coming forward. And I've got contact information on there. You can reach out to me as well. So I'm happy to field any questions that come my way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're on Facebook too, right?
Yeah, we've got a couple Facebook accounts.
All right. Well, thank you
Yeah,
so much. I learned a lot and really appreciate you being on the summit.
yeah, you're my pleasure, and thank you for what you're doing and for the people that you're helping. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye.